What is up? We are back on Reggie's World Sports. I'm Reggie. And before we get started, I just want to tell you guys to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff. And with that out of the way, we're going to get into these Falcons. Man, as you guys know already, the Falcons lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers opening game 18-10. It wasn't pretty at all. It was pretty rough for the home team. And, look, we're going to talk about it. And, look, if you were to look at the box score, like for people that probably are NFL fans that aren't Falcon fans that didn't watch the game, if you would have looked at the box score and you saw, both teams had similar amount of yards, both quarterbacks had similar amount of, passing attempts and passing yards. And, if you just looked at it and you just saw that one team, the team that won had 0 turnovers and the team that lost had 3 turnovers, and if you determine that the turnover differential would be the reason that the winning team won and the losing team lost, well, you would be correct. And that was kind of the case. The difference in the game ultimately, for the most part, is just the Falcons had 3 turnovers and the Steelers had none. And, look, when I look at the turnovers in that game, talking about the Falcons, in my opinion, I think that second turnover, when which, the Falcons were in driving position, they had the ball, they got a 4th down stop, and they were driving the length of the field. I think they were around at the 30, I think, maybe like 38 or something like that. And, the tight end, I think the backup tight end was in motion, and they end up fumbling the snap. The ball hit the tight end, and then TJ Watt recovered the fumble. And that possession right there, in my opinion, I think was a backbreaker. I think that turnover was more brutal because at that time the Falcons were up 10-9. Potentially the Falcons could have maybe scored a touchdown. It could have made it 17-9, and who knows what would have happened. Or at worst, it could have been at least a field goal. You could have been 13-9, and the Falcons would have had real momentum on their side. And if you look at how the game transpired after that turnover that the Falcons had, the Falcons offense was just never the same. I mean, they were just, it was just a mess all around after that. I mean, it wasn't particularly good from the start of the game, but it really turned for the worse after that turnover. And look, the Steelers, when that turnover happened, the Steelers came down the field, scored a field goal, and then it was, I think it was 12-10 at that point, and then it was just a mess after that. And so the turnovers, I felt like in that game were huge. And look, speaking of the turnovers, if you want to place a blame pie for the Falcons and why they just did not get the job done yet, why they didn't get the job done, I got to look at Kirk Cousins and I got to look at the offensive line. I'm going to start with the offensive line. And really Caleb McGarry, the right tackle, because I think he was probably the biggest liability for the most part, because look, I want to give Pittsburgh credit. Pittsburgh's defense, they're legit. You look at their defense, TJ Watt might be the best defensive player in the league. I mean, he is a monster, and he just wreaked havoc on the Falcons offensive line all game. Even on a few plays where he had some sacks and fumbles and it was called back because of other penalties. I mean, he was just in the backfield all game long. And the Falcons just had they didn't want anything to do with that man. I mean, that man was just kicking our butts all game. And so you look at a guy like him, and you look at defensively that you got Mika Fitzpatrick, they got Dante Johnson in the secondary. They added Cam Hayward, that linebacker that they signed in free agency. I can't remember his name, but they signed him from the Ravens. They ended up getting him. He was really good. I mean, they just you got I think that's Cam Hayward on the defensive line as well. Like they got dudes on defense, and it showed yesterday. Pittsburgh's defense just they just wasn't they weren't letting the Falcons do what they wanted to do on offense, and credit to them. But on the Falcons side, the offensive line was just, it was bad. Caleb McGarry, he just got his butt kicked by, again, T.J. Watt. It was disappointing to me that the Falcons, I know they did a little bit of it later in the game, but you never saw them kind of double T.J. Watt. He was left on an island most of the time. There was another time where they had like Kyle Pitts was trying to block him, and it was rough. It was really, really, really rough. The offensive line, I thought, which was, by most metrics and whatever, I mean, some people looked at the offensive line as a strength on this team, on the Falcons, and it just wasn't the case. I mean, the Falcons' offensive line they just had no chance whatsoever. And, it's just kind of what it was. And, I look at Kirk Cousins, and I know, and look, he's the talking point. And look, I gotta say, the Falcons' offensive line, they deserve their blame. But like I said earlier, Kirk Cousins, he just wasn't good. He wasn't good at all. You look at his stat line, he was 16 for 26. He had 155 yards. I think his yards per attempt was like 5.5. I think it was. No, I might be wrong. It was around like 6, maybe. It was either way. His stat line just wasn't good. I mean, 16 for 26 for 155 yards. He had a touchdown and only 2 picks. And by my estimation, watching Kirk Cousins, there were 2 instances where I thought he looked like himself. And it was the opening drive of the game where, Bijan Robinson, they were handing the ball off to Bijan Robinson, and Kirk Cousins even found him a couple of times on some dump offs. And look, that drive resulted in a field goal ultimately, but I thought Kirk looked pretty okay on that drive. And the other drive of the game where I thought Kirk looked like himself was the last drive before halftime when the Falcons drove down the field. I think Pittsburgh was up, I want to say, was it 9-3? I think it was. And, Kirk Cousins drove down the field, and ultimately he threw that touchdown to Kyle Pitts. And he had a couple of nice little other throws to McLeod as well, Ray McLeod. And so I thought he looked pretty good on that drive. At halftime you were thinking like, okay, after that drive, you would think, okay, maybe Kirk is starting to find his rhythm again. He's starting to, getting a little rhythm, and maybe after halftime, like, okay, Kirk is in a little bit of a groove. We might have something. And ultimately, it just didn't happen. Like that fumbled snap that I mentioned earlier happened. And Kirk Cousins, to me, just for the most part, like you can just tell that, he was a little rusty. I feel like you can tell that, he wasn't moving as well. He just didn't look right, for the most part. He was rattled. And look, part of it is also the offensive line, but part of it is him. Like, there are times where he was just double clutching on throws. He was a little late. I remember earlier in the game, like he had a throw that he threw. I think he was trying to throw Drake London, and then he basically threw it to Dante Johnson, the Pittsburgh Steelers corner. It was the opening drive of the game. It should have been picked, and he dropped it. And so, and that was kind of like the theme for Kirk for most of the game was he was just never in rhythm. He was never comfortable. He wasn't moving. And the picks that he threw were just bad picks. Like he was just rushing. It felt like his clock was speeding up. He was just never comfortable. And like the interception he threw, the 2 interceptions, the first one was like just really like it was just really bad. He threw an interception that just shouldn't happen. And then the last interception, which was, when the Falcons were down 15-10, and that's when the Falcons had the ball and they had a real chance to, kind of make something happen and potentially get the lead. I think they were at around like around the 40-something yard line, and he threw that pick, and that ended up being he threw that pick. He was trying to force the ball to McLeod, and that ended up being an intercept, and that ended up being our doing. And so Kirk Cousins, look, I'm not gonna panic over him too much. There are some things that I was disappointed with. I think one thing that was noticeable, that was a little more noticeable to me later on after I, looked at some stats that I read, that like not one time Kirk Cousins was under center and doing play action like that. That surprised me a lot. He was in shotgun a lot of the time, in the pistol formation, and he just didn't look comfortable. He just didn't look right. And look, it's one game. If there's one thing that I've learned watching football, the amount of times I've watched football, and look, I've watched NFL football going back for 26 years. Yeah, I know I'm a pretty old person, but I've watched NFL football for 26 years. And if there's one thing I've learned about the NFL, is week 1 is weird. Teams can look awful in week 1 and they can look fantastic the following week. Like that's what's going to happen. That happens. And that's going to happen. Like the teams that lost, that looked terrible. Now, and I'm not even just talking about the Falcons, but you look at like the Cardinals, you look at the Rams, you look at I'm not going to talk about the Panthers. To me, that's the one team I think they just stink. No disrespect to Carolina, but it might be a long year for you guys. I'm sorry. But you look at some of the other teams that lost, like I mentioned the Cardinals, I mentioned the Rams, I mentioned the Broncos, just any team that lost over the weekend. Most of those teams, I guarantee you, are going to look great in week 2. That's the NFL, and that's just kind of the reality of the beast. And so you don't want to overreact to week 1, just because the Falcons lost, and just because the Falcons lost to the Steelers, look, doesn't mean that they're going to get smacked by the Eagles. They could, because I think Philadelphia is really good. And look, the Falcons, these next 2 games against Philadelphia and Kansas City are not going to be easy at all. But look, it's the NFL. And so, you never want to overreact after week 1 results. And that's just kind of the case. But at the same time, Kirk Cousins specifically, he didn't look good. He just didn't look good. He didn't look comfortable. He was rattled. The game plan, I've seen people kind of question what Zach Robinson was doing. Now, I will give Zach Robinson credit for this. I think if there's one thing that I actually did think he did well, I thought he did a good job of getting Bijan Robinson involved. Like, that's the one thing that I thought he did and I thought he needed to do. Because when you playing a team like Pittsburgh, who does have a great defense, and especially they have a great defensive line and front seven that can get after the quarterback, you got to run the ball and you got to keep them off balance a little bit. And I thought he did, and I thought for the most part he did that. Now Bijan didn't have those explosive runs, and again, you credit Pittsburgh for that. But I thought they did. I thought Bijan being involved, like they did what they could to make things easier for Kirk, which is unfortunate that Kirk Cousins still had the game that he had, and he was just turning the ball over. It just can't happen. It just can't. It can't happen. One other note I want to mention is Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Drake London had 2 catches for 15 yards. Kyle Pitts had 3 catches for 26 yards. So combined, Kyle Pitts and Drake London had 5 catches for 41 yards. Like, that just can't happen. That can't happen. And look, that all ties back to Kirk. I get it, but look, man, these are 2 guys that you drafted, that you used top 10 picks on. And like, at some point, like, a question is going to have to be, we're going to have to ask the question, like, was it really the quarterback's fault that, Kyle Pitts didn't, was pedestrian, last year? Drake London, and look, I like Drake London. I believe in Drake London. But, at some point, man, like, the question is going to have to be asked, like, how good are these guys? How good is Drake London? How good is Kyle Pitts? And I thought both of them were just disappointing. Both of them were quiet. There were non-factors in the game. Kyle Pitts, I want to get to him a little bit. That penalty he had late in the game, that illegal motion penalty, like, it just can't happen. That can't happen. And that's another thing that I was disappointed with the Falcons. When they did have big play, when they did have positive plays, many times, especially in that second half, it was penalties, illegal motions. You had holding calls. I think Jake Matthews was called for a holding. Like, things like that can just break an offense. Penalties. It just can't happen. And so overall, I mean, looking at the Falcons from that game against the Steelers, it was disappointing. It was disappointing. The offense did not look good at all. The offensive line, and again, credit Pittsburgh, but the offensive line just did not match their physicality. And Kirk Cousins, he looked bad. He looked rusty. And, look, on one hand, we can say that is week 1. Kirk is coming off a torn Achilles. He's gonna need time. I get it. And he might need time. Like, truthfully, like, it might take Kirk Cousins another 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 more games for him to find his footing. Like, that could very well happen. But at the same time, when you look at what the Falcons paid this man, they paid him $180 million. I think $90 million of it, or $100 million of it, was guaranteed. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that they paid this man. So, like, on one hand, you can say that Kirk Cousins, like, he needs more time to get in rhythm, but at the same time, no one has time to wait. There's no patience. The Falcons have been telling the Falcons management, Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris has been telling the fan base, like, we're here to win. Win now. We want to win. Win. And this is what we got. This is the output we got on Sunday. It was not good. It wasn't good at all. But, look, I'm not gonna, as a Falcon fan, I'm not gonna panic. It's week 1. We got a tough game against Philadelphia. But it's a long year. I'm not gonna panic. But at the same time, highly disappointing effort from the Falcons the other night. It's highly disappointing. I expected more, and I was let down. And so, hey, that's just kind of what it is. And so, what do y'all think? What do y'all think? What are y'all thoughts? Hit that, hit the comments if you have anything. Like, comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's all I got at the moment. And I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, peace out.